In today's video, a 100% beginner's guide to airbrushing, where to start, what you need. Let's get to it. Ignoring the tools that are already on my desk, this is the basic equipment and setup you'll need for airbrushing. We can probably ignore the spray booth in the back, which we can go over later, but for now let's start by looking at the compressor. Now there's many varying different types of compressors, but this seems to be the most common that a lot of people are using, and many clones of this are probably coming out of the same factory, but if it looks like this, it's probably the right one. There are different types of compressors where they have an integrated hose and integrated airbrush. They're not ideal. This is a oilless piston version with a tank and regulator, so this is where you want to be. The biggest disadvantage of the integrated system is it's constantly pumping air, where this system will fill up the tank, stop compressing. While you use it, you'll deplete air and eventually it will need to refill, but you're not having to listen to a motor go over and over. Let's have a look at the regulator. So first of all, we've got our pressure gauge here. This is in bar and PSI. 1 bar is about 1 atmosphere, which is about 14 PSI. When we're actually painting, you want to keep it in this lower amount, not up the top like that, 20 to 30 PSI, but this could depend on what paint consistency, distance, etc. This is your regulator control. Lift it up, turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise to increase or decrease the pressure, and then lock it back down again. At the bottom here, this glass vessel is a water separator. This should trap any water and stop it getting into paint and diluting it. That little button at the bottom will release any pressure and water that may be trapped in the system. Up in the top corner there, you can see just showing you the drain plug for the actual tank. This can be undone regularly to make sure there's no water in the air tank. Now let's have a look at some hoses, fittings, and how to connect it all together. This is the hose supplied with the air compressor. It's a rubber hose with metal fittings, O-rings to stop leakage. If you do get a little bit of leakage, a little bit of plumbing tape should solve that problem. Don't kink them and you should have no worries. These are the quick release airbrush fittings. This is purchased separately. Like everything else in this video, there'll be links below in the description. These are quite cheap, and just like the hose, they have their own O-rings, so they shouldn't leak. Just press it in and it clips together. Very simple. Pull it back, lets it go. These fittings have a one-way valve, so as long as you don't disconnect the wrong way, they shouldn't leak out. Let's see how to connect them up to the hose. Connecting these fittings is pretty simple. Just don't over tighten them. You don't need tools, just put it in until it's snug and then tweak it up a little bit more. Then repeat the process with the compressor end. Obviously this is pretty simple stuff, but some people aren't mechanically minded, so I just want to cover it off. Again, just snug it up. It doesn't have to be super tight. Just finger tight and then just give it a little bit of a and then it's done. Plug the hose in and you're ready to go. Now it's time to bring in the star of the show, our gravity feed airbrush. I think this one is a 3mm needle, maybe a 3.5mm needle. Obviously we've got an airbrush inside and a few little components. Let's have a look at the airbrush first. This airbrush actually came with the compressor set. It wasn't a particularly expensive brush, but it feels alright, and I'm yet to use it because again this is 100% a beginner's guide. Our fitting from before works very much the same, just hand tight and snug it up at the end, and then you've got your quick release fitting. You can just use the direct fittings from the hose, but this just makes life a little bit easier. Adding the fitting to the hose on this end. Again, we're just repeating the process. Don't put it the wrong way around like I did in the clip. Plug her in. Plug the brush in. And essentially we're ready to paint. But let's have a look at the brush in a little bit more detail. So having a closer look at the brush, it comes with a few little things in the container. Little tool, we'll see what that's for in a minute. the original fitting, which I've taken off and put the quick release on, and a dropper, so it helps you put your paint in. Obviously, it's not too special. The brush itself is a cheaper model, but it will get the job done. I do plan on picking up an Iwata Eclipse, which is a Australian dollars, but a $200 airbrush. So look, there's plenty of options around. This is just what I got in the kit, and again, I'm going to upgrade to the Iwata. But pulling it apart is pretty easy. It's not as daunting as you might think. Just having a look in the pot here. We'll go over cleaning when we actually get to the painting video. But the brushes are delicate, but if you handle them with care, it's not a big deal. So taking off the needle cover here, that just protects the tip of the needle. You have to be very, very careful with this. They're very easy to break. And as you can see, it's really, really small. Needle retraction. With that cap on, it just gives you a bit of a safety net. You can paint without the cap on, it's not a problem. Now, pulling that cap off gives us actually access to the needle cone. I believe that's what it's called, being new at this. That little tool from before will bring that out again soon. So taking the end cover off gives us a view of the back of the needle and the retention screw. Some brushes have this open. This particular brush has a cover. So that's a retention nut or on a screw or whatever you want to call it. I bring it in a little bit closer here. You can see that screw has a little cuts in it. So when you screw that nut down, it clamps onto the needle and holds it in place. But with that off, the needle should slide out. And there's your needle when it's in focus anyway. So again, these things are brittle. They're not overly expensive to replace, but unless you've got stock, it's a pain in the butt if you've got to break one and then wait for another one to come in the middle of a paint job. This screw here is your, I guess you'd call it a tensioner. It's got a little spring behind it. That's for your control. So how much tension you want on your trigger, so to speak. So that screws in and out a fair way. There again is a little spring behind it. So just be careful pulling that out. And we'll sort of get hooked. Pop that one down. The spring. And this little shaft here has a little clip that sits behind the trigger. So when you're pulling it out, it will just get caught a little bit there. You can see it. That's just to stop that from falling out. So just slowly bring that out on a little bit of an angle. And there you go. From there, we can just pull the trigger out. Now this gives us access to pretty much clean and make sure all components are in good, give them any lubricant we need to, and so on. So again, with the tip here, that little tool we saw before, it's a miniature spanner. So that is to be able to unlock the cone. I'm not going to do it here because there's no reason. And behind that cone, there is some O-rings and seals and stuff, and I don't want to disturb those unless I absolutely have to. Now, reassembly can be a bit of a pain. So you see that little brass floppy bit at the bottom of that trigger? That actually sits on an air valve inside the brush. So when it's a dual action brush. So when you push the button down, you're releasing air. When you pull it back, it adds paint. Again, we can go through that when we're actually painting. But what happens is that little brass pole there pushes down the air valve and then again lets the air up through the hose. And it can be a little bit tricky to get it to sit back into that valve. So just take your time. Don't force anything. Again, slide that shaft back in. That little clip will just sort of pop into place. Make sure the orientation is the way that you pulled it out. Spring back on. And then we get our tensioner screw. And we'll slide that over the top. And then screw it in. Now, you can screw it in all the way. It's obviously going to give you a lot more tension. But it's up to you. What I would suggest is running the brush with the end cap off and working that trigger back and forth with a little bit of paint on some test paper or a bit of cardboard or whatever, and figure out what feels nice to you with that tension. I've just got it set about midway. But again, mileage may vary and it's really up to the end user. Once we've done that, we need to put the needle back in. Now again, this is probably the most sort of precarious and difficult part. I would suggest just guiding it along your finger so you don't jab the end of the needle into anything. And then just slowly, carefully push it back in. Once it's in, you can sort of give it a little bit of a harder push, and it should just pop out the end there. Once that's done, it's seated. Get our retention screw or nut, whatever we want to call it. Slide that on. Again, don't have to over tighten it. Just tighten it up until it's snug and that needle doesn't move. Check your movement on your trigger. Make sure the action is still working at every part of the assembly process. Our cap back on, nice and tight. Let's get our fittings. So that's our end cap that covers the cone there. Again, just finger tight, don't over tighten them because you'll regret that later. And then that little cover over the needle tip there. Once it's done, our fitting back on. Again, don't over tighten it. Little O-ring in there, so let that seat. And that's our cap. I don't use a cap. No one really does because you'll be mixing paint in this thing off and on. And then there's our airbrush all back together and ready to use. So now having a look at everything connected up together, we can see the machine here with the power switch and turn it on. And we get our sound from our compressor in the background. So you can see the gauge has nothing on it at the moment, but that will build up fairly quickly. While that's happening, you can still get air out of the brush, but ideally I'd wait for the optimum pressure to build up. Again, while you're waiting, it's probably a good idea to check your fittings in these locations. Make sure there's no air escaping them. If they are, go back with your tape, plumbing tape, or some type of there's goos and things you can use for these fittings to stop any air leaks. Now our pressure is up. We can turn it up and down using the gauge. We can see that it's gone up, but you won't see it go down until you relieve some pressure. So grab your airbrush, give it a little pump with the air, and you'll see that pressure bounce up and down. So the more we turn our regulator down, the more we'll see that dip after pressing the button. And we're looking for around that 20 psi at the moment. So we'll keep turning it down until we get to that number. Pretty close, and then push it back in. And then we have our airbrush sort of ready to go. Put some paint in, test it out, make sure our action's working. Down for air, pull back for paint. So when you're painting, same thing. Down for air, then pull back for paint, and then release. This is our water catcher. You can see pressing that will release some air, and if there's any water in there, it will drop out. Now the compressor's turned off, it's holding pressure. You can see we can use this brush for quite a while. Back and forth. This is how you would do a back blow. So this can help you mix your paint. Again, we'll go through that in the next video. But again, just checking the action on this brush, using a little bit of air while we're mucking around. You can see the compressor stays off for quite a while. Time to look at our optional but recommended extra, our portable fold-up spray booth. This thing is really worth its weight in gold. It's very compact, very light, but surprisingly handy. This will save you a lot of cleanup time. So assembly time. We get our box, we unfold it and put it together. Seems simple, right? Well, it is. So we undo the flap from the bottom and fold the top up. Once you do that, we'll see that there is a couple of little sections that can fold out. So we'll just sort of drop down as we fold that forward. And everything's a little bit unstable till you get it together. So this first section here has two sort of rectangular flaps that you can see there at the bottom. Just get those up out of the way to start with, because you can't unfold the rest until that's out of the way. Just sit it as you can. We'll go through the tabs in a second. Now lift the bottom up, and then the other section will fold out. You can see why I said just kind of sit it there. Now I've got two sets of tabs. It's easy to kind of grab these at the same time. I'll put a little overview showing where the tabs press in up in the corner. As you're doing this, they may fall apart, but at this stage you can get two hands on it. Now on mine, that bottom left corner there, you can see that a couple of tabs have popped out and it's given it a little bit of a lopsided top, but that's fine. I push those in later once I notice. So there we are. Here's the turntable it comes with. Some people use this, some people don't. If you're painting something fairly heavy that's not going to get blown around with the airbrush, it's probably ideal. But for a miniature, I'd suggest just wearing a glove and you know, making sure you don't spray all over everything. Nitrile gloves are really cheap. Here we've got the filter. It's a double filter system. I haven't looked into replacements for this, but it's pretty simple stuff to get. Essentially just a double layer of synthetic filter medium. Now, once we get this machine running, you'll be able to see that, again, it's not too loud, just like the compressor. You can hear it in the background here, and it's got a fair bit of suction. So just using a piece of paper here to show you the actual suction on this. And remember, this is actually running through 2 filters, so maintaining that amount of suction, any particulate from your spraying or your airbrushing should get picked up nicely. Be aware that you will get overspray all over the booth. Some people will put cardboard or plastic over the outsides, but it depends if you're going to leave it set up or not. So you can see now, absolutely no suction until you turn it back on, and there it is again. The rest of this stuff is all accessories for our spray booth. Pipes and connections and whatnot. This is all to ventilate into an external air source or out of the room you're working in, however you want to do it. Some people just don't like the smell of paint. That's fine. The filters in the unit will capture the paint, but the odor will go through. So this is just a way to make it a little bit nicer for you. This particular fitting that we're seeing now just has some little slots and grooves that you twist on, and it will lock on once you find the right spot. From there, you get a little rubber sleeve that will go onto that fitting, and the pipe will go between those. There was a little hose clamp, or a large hose clamp on the bench there that I didn't show going on, but that just makes it a little bit more permanent. Once you've done that, this other fitting looks like a bit like a vacuum cleaner head or something. Is designed to be trapped between a window frame and a window, or under a door, something like this. In my case, the way I've tested it, and you'll see in the little clip above, is sandwiched between a window frame and a sliding window, so that can vent outside. I'm personally not too concerned because I don't mind the smell of paint, but some people it may give a headache or bother in some way, so the options are there. This hose here extends quite a way, and it is rigid, so it will hold whatever shape you put it in. This could become brittle outside, so when you're done, pack it up. It doesn't take up much room. Okay, let's finish up. Thanks for watching, guys. This was part 1 of where to start with airbrushing. Part 2 will cover off how we actually go about painting, and this will be my first time doing any airbrushing at all, so it really is a true beginner's guide. Please like, share, subscribe. This is my first video back. I know I'm dating it for anyone watching in the future, but this is my first video back in some time, so hopefully it went alright. Let me know in the comments below. And again, please subscribe and like, because it will help share this video around. Thanks for watching. Bye.